Hello, everyone. Thanks for hanging out. We will have you switched over. Now you can see everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I am Q Gross, and I'm joined by my co-founder here at CannaBuzz, JR Token. He's right down below me. And then here in the big spotlight, we have Steven Johnson. He is the CEO and co-founder of HLG. Thanks for joining us today, Steven.
Hey, great to be here, and thank you guys for having me on. Always love the time spent and chopping up and talking shop.
For
Beautiful.
sure. We're
Glad to
super
have you.
stoked to have you here. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So shout out to everyone who's watching us live right now on CannaBuzz. We really appreciate it. We've already got some folks in there. So thanks everyone on the live stream. And then of course, thanks for everyone who supports CannaBuzz. We appreciate you all. But I've been helped out big time this week with JR came in. He's got a bunch of questions here that we're going to go through today and learn more about HLG and lighting and LED lights. So we've got a lot of really great topics to cover today. So I will just start out where, how about you kind of introduce us, Steven, to maybe a little bit to you, but also to HLG, kind of help us understand, who you are and the company that you're with.
Okay, yeah. So Horticulture Lighting Group, or HLG for short, is a U.S. manufacturer of very high efficiency lights that are LED lights that are more aimed towards the cannabis industry. Currently, we are looking into the food industry some. We're coming out with some new products, but and in some are in development. But mostly the cannabis industry. It kind of was founded by myself, Steven Johnson, and Amit Chandanu, who is my business partner up in Columbus, Ohio, and we're here in outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. So it was founded basically out of a forum. I don't know if you guys are really familiar with rollitup.org, but so we were kind of in the LED section, us, and I know everybody's probably familiar with a guy named Grow Mouse. He actually is an employee of ours now and helps us out with development. And he also works as lead grower at one of our sister grows that we do R&D at.
Cool.
And basically, basically we all kind of started out nerding out on LED tech back in 2015, 2016, when the forums back when the Cobb LEDs were kind of the new kind of thing that was efficient white light LEDs. And Amit and I both had separate companies. I owned a company called Johnson Grow Lights, and Amit owned a company named Northern Grow Lights. And through some really blessed, but then also unfortunate circumstances, we came together and created the Horticulture Lighting Group. So I had a business partner. It was my uncle up in Ohio. He was about 35, 40 minutes away from Amit. And Amit and I would chit chat and talk on the phone about LED tech, but we were kind of competitors, but not really. And my uncle unfortunately was killed in an accident, and Amit came down and to meet me in person and and give me his condolences and things, and that's kind of what spurred the idea of us working together. And from there we created the Horticulture Lighting Group, and that's kind of where it took off. And our breakthrough product was something called the Quantum Board, and I'm sure everyone's kind of familiar with that. And so we looked at making modular light engines specific for horticulture. So we looked. So everybody in the industry at the time was using Cobb LEDs, and white light really wasn't a thing. So most companies were still doing the red and blue diodes, and it was kind of now everyone in cannabis uses white light LED, but back then there was maybe a company or two that was just dabbling in it at the time. And it was just kind of, for me, it was like, the sun isn't purple, it's white. So why wouldn't the plants use all of that, and for years, and even some of the first trade shows we went to, there would be lighting companies saying plants don't use green light, which now we know is absolutely not true. But that was kind of the thing just less than a decade ago, and so that's kind of where we took off and separated, is we back then LEDs weren't even put in horticultural units or in PPF or micromoles or anything like that. So everything was by lumens, and lumens don't really translate to micromoles. It depends on the spectrum and the color temperature, all kinds of things. So we actually created a spreadsheet where we could take these spectrums and digitize it, plug it in, and actually find out how many photons were coming out of the LEDs. So that's how I saw this Samsung LED and looked at the spectrum and I looked at the lumens. I'm like, hey, this LED, and back then it was called LM561B plus or LM561C was the next generation of that. I said, look, these LEDs right here are putting more light out per watt than those cobs or anything else we've seen by far. And he said, no, I don't think it'll work, because the cobs were really small and they were really intense for the amount of wattage that was coming out of that small area. He said that these others won't penetrate. And then that's where I kind of varied off and said, I think penetration is you think about light is like pouring out. Let's say it's in a bucket and you pour it out like water. There's a volume. So penetration is you get enough volume and enough beam angles, it's going to penetrate because there's a lot of light. So that's where we came up with a quantum board. And he said, well, we'll try it. And we made one, and I lit up the first one that we ever got produced. And I was like, dude, you have to see this. So I sent it to Ahmed up in Ohio. He fired it up. He's like, okay, I think we're on to something. And so we produced about 1,000, and we gave a good majority of them away to growers on Roll It Up and said, tell us what you think. And it was basically, Ahmed had a credit card and I had a little bit of money in the bank, and it was just like, let's try it, And so we made that first 1,000 and gave away about 500 of them. And people were like, I'll make some, I want more. I'm replacing all my lights. And we were like, okay, this is a thing. Nice. And we actually, so we made about 1,000 quantum boards in China. And then, because we had no ability to make them at the time, which we now make them ourselves in-house in Tennessee, years later. But so I went and I kind of really went against the grain, and I said, let's get them made in the United States. And we approached this company, but the volume, we had to order 10,000, which at the time was well north of $1 million, and it's like, oh my God. He's like, if we order, maybe it was even more than 10,000. I don't remember. It was $1 million worth, over $1 million. He said, if we can't sell these things, we're kind of financially ruined, because you're liable for that. And I said, Ahmed, I think we can sell them. Surely to God, we can sell them at cost if we have to. And we had them make them, and we got our first batch of, like, I think it was 2,500, and it was supposed to be 1,000 a month. And we got our first batch in October of 17, and by October of 16, and by February of 17, we went through the entire PO. It was like, holy crap, this is a thing, and then the snowball from there. People were like, this is it, and at the time, we were much more efficient than anyone else. And from there, so you take a standard general light bulb, like, in a household, it'll use 2 or 3 LEDs, right? So each quantum board at the time was 304 LEDs. So that's like 100 light bulbs. So we just went through, 100,000 light bulbs in 2 months, so Samsung called us and said, worth of LEDs anyway. And Samsung called us and said, what are you guys doing with all these LEDs? And we said, we're building something called the quantum board and their grow lights. And they said, that's the craziest stuff we've ever heard. And they laughed it off. Well, it was probably 6 months later, they hired this American sales team who's still the 2 best guys in the world, Ash and Brock. And they said, hey, look, Samsung's intrigued by this. Would you be willing to work with us on some of this stuff and, on horticulture? So we helped them develop their entire horticulture line. Samsung didn't have a red LED, high power, a blue, any of the horticulture metrics, nothing. Wow. We helped them develop everything in this kind of handshake deal. And then they were like, you've really helped us out. And we made so the LM301B, which is the chip everyone uses today, or at least the iteration of that. We were the first in the world to buy that LED. And no one would pay the money for it at the time, but then that's when we hit really high numbers and everyone else was kind of behind. So we kind of built their name in horticulture, if you will, somewhat, because we talked about the chips, we talked about the tech always. and everyone else would just keep anything they were doing. It's kind of like priority, and we would send all our stuff off to a third-party laboratory out in Anaheim, and it was a Department of Energy certified lab. So when we got these results, it's like, okay, this is about as close as you can get to really knowing where you're at. And we were really ahead of the game. And so from there, Samsung just kind of said, you guys have been good to us. And everybody that calls us says, hey, we want the LEDs HLG's using in our lights. What do we need to do? So at the time when we were buying the LM301B, I think they were selling like 10 million LEDs a year. And now they sell like 30 or 40 million a month,
Wow.
so it really, it really skyrocketed. And so they gave us some partnership where they've hung our lights in their LFI booths, and they do presentations and say HLG is this, and we have their branding, and we're the only company in the US that can actually brand a Samsung Horticulture. So it's kind of, so we've had some some benefits from it. One thing I was telling someone the other day, and it was kind of funny. I was talking to a guy, and I said, we've got this partnership with Samsung, and they brought this to me here. There was only 3 companies in the US that they invited down to Atlanta, and they brought us in, and it was really interesting. So the CEO of the lighting company came in from Korea, and he brought us this, and he made Ahmed and I one of these, and if you look at that, it's a 24 karat gold business card that says Steve Johnson CEO on it. So pretty amazing. They brought that to us, and it's like 24 karat gold. I was like, cool, so they brought us that. It's a neat little gift, so we've had that really good partnership with them, and to this day we run chips that no one else in the world runs. Right now, we currently run something called the LM301 Evo, and we actually have the Evo H and B, and no one in the world buys Evo H except us right now. And that's why we're always kind of on that cutting edge, because we're willing to, we are indeed in our hemp facility. So we have a sister company called Flow Gardens, and it's a CBD company. And we grow indoor CBD flower, and we just won the High Times Hemp Cup this year and the Emerald Cup. We beat out over 500 something contestants in the Emerald Cup and took the best.
I saw that. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
So our R&D facility kind of ended up doing pretty well all by itself. And so we've been really blessed to just meet a lot of great people and hire a lot of great people along the way. And it's just been a trip for sure.
Excellent. Well, we got a wide variety of growers that are a part of our community. And so just for some of the guys that are older who maybe haven't made that transition yet, can you talk a little bit about the advantages of LED versus HID lighting?
So there's a few advantages. So HID has one advantage to it. The fixtures, if you were buying it today, are relatively dirt cheap, right? So you can get in really cheap, but you're going to have, so that's kind of the advantage, but it ends pretty quickly once you start doing the math. So a double-ended HPS will put out 2100 micromoles from the bulb, when it's brand new, and that kind of drops off kind of more rapidly than you would think. And then once you actually, so it's a 360 degree light source. So when you start reflecting 2/3 of that light down, you lose a lot in that reflection process. So you go from 2100 micromoles to about 1850 when the bulb is brand new. So in about a 9-month time frame in between the bulb darkening each cycle that you turn it on, it gets a little darker, and then the reflector will oxidize, and it's not as reflective as it used to be. You lose about 10% in that 9 months. So now that 1850 is down to about 1600 and change. So when you start and you take that 9-month average that they tell you to use it, you're really at about 1700 micromoles over the life of the lifespan of that bulb when you average it out. So where the advantages are is you're using about 1050 watts for about 1700 micromoles of the canopy. a really high end LED, like for instance the HLG Scorpion Diablo, you're at over 2,000 micromoles to the canopy, and the degradation on that is less than a quarter percent annually at how hard we drive the LEDs. So the driver will just fail before you lose 5% of your light. So it's 100,000 hour warranty on the drivers, the power supplies. So that's an inherent advantage. Number one is consistency is much greater with an LED. The spectrum itself, if you ever look at the spectrum on HPS, it's much it's photons, so it's kind of like junk food. They'll grow and they'll do okay on it, but it's not a balanced diet, if you will. So the spectrum is superior. You're utilizing about 650 to 675 watts versus that 1,050. So over the lifespan of that fixture, you will save a whole lot on electricity, more than what that you saved in that upfront cost. Plus the residual bulb change and reflector change is about $120. So LEDs have those advantages, plus the amount of heat that they actually introduce to the grow room. So a watt is a watt, so it's about 3.41 BTUs. Even if it was 100% efficient light and it was all light, that light will still turn into heat at some point in the grow room. So you're requiring about a third less HVAC, or a little more less HVAC build out cost, because you're needing less tonnage, and then also you're using less power because you're not having to HVAC as much heat out of the room. So that's how a good LED system can actually reduce your power consumption overall by 50%. And so in a 10 light room, that starts adding up pretty quick.
I agree with that. I've experienced that myself, now converting completely from HID to LED. My costs for power have gone down quite a bit, and it's not as taxing on my mini split in the summertime. Especially.
Right. And see, if you would have been, instead of retrofitting, if you would have been doing a greenfield build out, let's just say a 100 light room, you would have required less HVAC tonnage altogether, which would have saved you money there as well. So some of that upfront cost is kind of a little bit offset. So right now our ROI, even versus HPS, is about a year, and that's no rebating. So in other words, you'll spend a little more money, but about year one, you break even. And then from there, it's just savings. And if you look at like a lot of these places like California, they're mandating LEDs and things like that. And so I think Boston's the same way, Massachusetts. And you go out like to Washington State, they have like the rebates are so big because this growing is so hard on the grid that it's actually cheaper to pay you to not abuse the grid than it is to actually upgrade the grid. So a lot of these guys, they get their lights almost completely free. I mean, it's crazy. Wow. So we've got some states where the guy's got like $10 a light in it after it's all said and done. And it's pretty interesting. But the big thing is we know we can't create any more coal burning power plants. Nuclear is very expensive to create a power plant. And as you know, green energy is great, but it's a fair weather product. You know what I mean? If it's storming, solar don't work so well. And if it's wintertime, you don't get as much solar. And if the wind's not blowing, you don't have it. So these are good supplementals, but you just can't, double the size of the grid with that and hope for the best, and then you're starting to introduce batteries and storage, and it's a mess. So it's much better to try not to use the power to start with. So that's what they figured out. It's about a third of the cost to go ahead and do rebates and do LED as to upgrade the grid for HPS.
Right. Well, our next question was about kind of touching on the stages of growth with a cannabis plant. So typically growers will separate it into the veg state and the flower state. And sometimes people use different lights or have different considerations for each of those stages. So I guess we'll start with veg first. Could you speak to what someone needs for a good veg LED light?
So part of the strategy I'll kick into HLG's thought process, but part of the strategy when we first got into it, We had a 4K light and a 3K light. Then we moved to B spec and R spec because people were used to that. I got to have a veg light. It has to have a different spectrum. It can't be the same spectrum as my bloom light. It just can't, right? Because in HPS world, it was kind of true, because an HPS was very much orange and red heavy and would give you very lanky growth if you didn't use something like a metal halide or then later on a ceramic metal halide. So you had a lot of growers in that mindset. So my marketing mind said, I know that a 3500K white light is good all the way through, somewhere in that range back when it was just white light LEDs. But to get these growers to kind of feel good about it, maybe we do a 4K and a 3K instead of just the one spectrum that does it all. So we actually had bloom specific lights, but we always said 3K does everything really well, and it did. It veges fine and blooms great. So we always said, hey, if you're going to run one light, run 3K, but if you want to have separate veg room, do 4K, 3K. Well, now we're kind of more, now that I'm not going to say that the market's mature, but the actual audience is more mature. So they're more educated now, finally. So now I can just give you the best spectrum that does everything. And that's what we do with the new spectrums at HLG. So you don't have a separate veg and bloom spectrum anymore. It's not necessary, because if you go outside, the sun really doesn't change that much from summer to fall, spectrum wise.
Right.
Interesting, because I kind of noticed that it seemed like the quality of the product I was seeing put out by LED lights seemed to improve in flower when you started getting up to that 600 watt range and adding the red spectrum.
Right.
Can you kind of speak to, was it more the wattage, or was it more the spectrum, or the combination of the two?
Well, I think it was probably the combination of the two. So when we started, so it's kind of like, so when we started adding in supplemental red, you were so right. So when we first started, the reds sucked. They were terrible. The LEDs were bad. So you just use the white light 3K LED to get all your oranges and reds. Well, that's why you use 3K, so you get enough red, because at about an 80 CRI chip, really, it's good at making green and some red, but not real good at the deeper reds. Well, and you got into 90 CRI, the efficiency just plummeted from that red phosphorus because it's just not efficient. Well, so when we started doing the red LED, the red LEDs themselves, the 660 nanometer reds, we were able to cool off our whites more. So what that did was it gave you some more blue over here that you were kind of sacrificing to get enough red before. So now you got some blue, you got some red, and you got an ample amount of green, instead of being not quite enough blue, but barely enough red and a lot of green. So it's all compromised for the technology at the time. But so since the 660s are there now, you're able to have that extra blue over here and have the red. So you get that production from your red, and you get your quality from those heavy photons beating on the canopy and it creating the resins and things to protect itself. So that's why that you noticed once we started using those red LEDs, we also cooled off the whites. That extra blue is what brought on the quality, and the red brought on the quantity. So you got both, best of both worlds then.
Yeah, that's when I really jumped in. I noticed that, and that was when I was ready to get rid of my 1,000-watt HPS fixtures. My next question is for our home growers who are maybe just doing one 4x4 tent. What fixture or what light do you guys have that you would recommend for someone in a 4x4 tent?
So for a 4x4 tent, it depends on your budget. So
just overall best light for getting the best product.
Okay, so for cost, if I'm a home grower and I'm looking at cost, so I mean, if you're really good, Scorpion Diablo is of course the best there is, but it's a little much for a 4x4, honestly. But we have something called the Blackbird, and that's kind of a miniature Scorpion, and it was made specifically for a 4x4, so it does really well in a 4x4. It has a very enhanced red and blue spectrum, like we were talking about earlier, and that is made in such a way. And Flow Gardens loves it. My business partner loves the spectrum on the on the Blackbird. What it does is it keeps that internodal spacing rather tight. Like if you were trying to grow some real tight indicas, it may be a little actual much, a little bally, if you will, like the plant's kind of wadded up, it would be so tight. But most everybody's growing hybrids these days of some sort. So it works out really well, because the one thing that I looked at if I'm in a tent, and this is what this is for, is a 4x4 tent, is I'm kind of height limited a little bit, right? I don't have an 8-foot room. So by shrinking that internal spacing, I'm able to get more buds per say lineal foot, and then that way I can grow shorter plants and still get my yields. So that's why we created. So the Blackbird is really good for a 4x4 tent. If I was to step up to a 5x5, I would probably look at the Scorpion Diablo. And we've got some other lights coming out, and we'll be showing those, something called the 750 and 700R, and those would be really, really, really good in a 4x4 as well.
That's really cool. How close can the plants grow to the LEDs? Because you just made me think about height, like you said, in a 4x4.
For proper spread on like a Scorpion, let's say a Blackbird, which is a miniature Scorpion, basically, I'd like to see 18 inches, 18 to 20 inches. And for me, I've always designed my lights for a minimum of 18 inches. I don't want them closer. Like we are introducing a bar style light in the future, and that's just kind of a thing. It is HLG's own spin on it. It is totally different than anything you've ever seen on the market. We have some patented technology behind it, but I'm not a super fan of bars, but the market really wants them. So I made something that really will trump all the rest. But for me, I like to have that 18 to 24 inches, because I don't want a light that I'm at 12 inches or 8 inches like you see these guys advertising.
Yeah.
How the hell are you going to service your plants or diagnose it to look in and make sure that everything's okay? Let me raise the light every time I'm going to defoliate, or every time I want to look and make sure I don't have some kind of pest infestation. No, thanks. Let's do 18 to 24 inches. I can get in there and work on my plants and still not run out of headroom like with an HID where I have to have 36 inches, So that's kind of my bread and butter, is about 18 inches. And that's where most of our lights are designed. And maybe it's selfish of me, but I've always designed things the way that I would want to grow, in those particular situations.
And now with a lot of home growers and smaller growers, they're definitely LED and going LED. Would you say that is true for commercial setups as well?
Yes. So I would say that more than 70% of greenfield projects, which means new projects from the ground up, and then a lot of retrofit, are going LED. And I think it's just a combination of rebating and the knowledge is finally there, So the LED industry itself kind of took a hard hit for grow lights, because I don't know if you remember those UFOs from back in the day. They had these UFOs and they were like $1,000, and they'd say, "Oh, it's 150 watts and it'll grow as much as 1,000 HPS." Plants don't use all this spectrum, just the red and blue. It's all bullshit anyway. But so what that did was these guys were spending upwards of $1,700-$1,800 on a Chinese pile of garbage, throwing it in there, and it didn't perform. So then we had a real uphill battle. LEDs don't work, man. No, these are different. Trust me, LEDs don't work. And we eventually, at the industry, eventually now it's just a given that LED is where it's at.
That's super cool, and I appreciated what you were saying earlier about the rebates. I just seen some stuff. I live in California as well, and I've seen some stuff about those rebates. So it's so interesting that it's becoming easier and easier for businesses to switch over to LED, and just more and more of a smart business decision.
Yeah, and I'm actually part of so I'm working with a company here in Knoxville, and they're one of their locations in Knoxville. It's a national company that's a 501c that's government funded. And what they did, they've actually fixed the grid at the Hoover Dam and different things. They work on the grid, but it's a nonprofit to help solve problems. So they're called MRPI. So they tested our lights. They come down, they said, I can't believe you're in our backyard. They came down, took our lights to their sphere and said, this is the most efficient lights we've ever tested. So they actually kind of talked that. So I don't know if you ever heard of the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA. It's a pretty big power conglomerate that covers a pretty big chunk of the Southeast. And so we're right now working with them. They will not rebate for cannabis, hemp, anything like that, only food production. And they are now that we're working hand in hand with TVA, and I've been in meetings with some of the biggest guys to make sure that the South gets some love, when it comes to getting some rebates, because again,
Cool.
we can't afford to add grid capacity either.
Right. Well, so earlier you were talking about quantum boards and how that was such a big shift for you guys and the industry more broadly. And then you also mentioned bar lights. So could you kind of explain like what a quantum board is and how that's different from a bar light? We actually had someone in chat ask about like, what's a bar light? So what we might need
Okay, so
some
for me, a bar light
explanations.
is generally you'll see like about a 40 to 44 inch bar, and you'll see a multiple of those, 6 to 8 of them on an array, and they'll be, and they're kind of, each one may be running at 60 to 80 watts, and they're made to sandwich down onto the canopy and try to create an even spread. And the thing is with those is they're great for height limited situations like growing in racks, or if you have a very short tin or short area, they're absolutely great because you can get them close to the canopy and not burn your plants. The drawback for me with bar lights, and I've heard this a few times, is so I don't know if you've ever heard of something called the inverse square law, but basically every time you double the distance from a light source, you quadruple the coverage. Or you quadruple the coverage, but you also cut the intensity by a fourth by doubling. So if you're at 12 inches from the canopy, you go 12 inches into the canopy and you're now at 1/4 the intensity because that light is spread away. So that's why I like to be at 24 inches and hitting that canopy good. That means you're not down to a quarter intensity till you're 24 inches into the canopy. You see what I'm saying? So what we've noticed with the quantum boards is your secondary growth is much fuller and much more viable product to sell versus the bar lights. Now, if you plant around those bar lights and you grow very short compact plants and you leaf strip a lot and do a lot of lollipopping, you can get a lot of great tops with those things, and it's absolutely. But if you're a lazy ass like me and you want to grow a little taller and not have to do as much lollipopping, the quantum boards are kind of more intense at that 24-inch level, and then you get that canopy penetration. So that's kind of the nutshell. Like I said, again, I was kind of greedy and said I want my light 24 inches away from the plants so I can work on them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why I created the quantum boards, and Amit and I did, and that's basically what fueled it. And we've had a lot of growers that run the bar lights and they run our lights, and they say that, and it's always the feedback I get is the thing I notice is my secondary growth is much better under the quantum boards.
Interesting. That's really cool. JR, did you want to take this next one?
Yeah. So with the quantum board, about how many burning hours do you get out of a board?
Okay, so that's a kind of a loaded question. So there's a few things. So you have different quantum boards. We have something called the Diablo board, which is 648 whites and 18 reds per board. And so that's 36 strings. So in other words, you take the current you're putting in and it's divided amongst 36 strings. Well, then you have QB288, which is 16 strings. So if you introduce that same amount of wattage, these LEDs are running harder. So a QB288 is a lower cost option versus 648 because there's less than half the LEDs on it. So it's less than half to produce, but you're running them harder. So they're going to degrade at like a 1 to 1.5% annually versus that 0.25% annually. So your lifespan isn't going to be as good, but you also pay half the price. The reason we make these 648s this way and other things is as you decrease the drive current per LED by having more and more of them, you get more light per watt. So it's an increase in efficiency. So like the Scorpion Diablo right now has, I almost 4,000 LEDs, like 3,990 something LEDs on it, where a Scorpion R spec would have like 1,700 and change. So the same amount of wattage going in, each LED running harder or softer, depending on which light you're looking at. So, so that's the key. So when you run those diodes twice as hard on the 288, you still get a really decent efficiency. Like the right now, the Scorpion R spec with the 272 quantum board on it, it runs 2.81 micromoles per joule, which is in the industry is pretty damn good overall. But then you take that same fixture though, and you put a 648 on it, it's 3.1, 3.2 micromoles per joule. So you're getting about 10% more light for that same wattage. So, but you're paying about 45% more for the light because there's that many more LEDs, and I have to pass the cost on, So, so when you ask that question, how long do they last? It can be anywhere from a quantum board will last, a QB648 will last, 15, 20 years to that you could get usable life before you'd want to think about changing it to a 288 to about 8 to 10 years. Either case,
Wow.
For me, I've always looked at it like do the 288, because by the time that 8 to 10 years comes along, there'll be some laser or something or some shit that's way better. Technology advances. It just does. I'd have never thought CDs would have ever been, they'll outdo the CD. Nope. Now you just have a damn phone and you got it all in your phone. So you don't even have CDs anymore. So see, it's always changing. When I was a kid, it was cassette tapes and we'd stick them in there and record off the radio. Oh man, my favorite songs on recording, So now it's all dead. JR remembers those days, don't you, buddy?
That's right. I do.
Yeah.
I absolutely do. Or like you'd take the cassette tape of like your sisters of some crappy music and you'd put those little tabs in there. Fill it, so then you can record over.
Yeah, exactly. Or I got fortunate enough. I got for Christmas one year. I got one with 2 tape decks.
Yeah.
I'd borrow everybody's and record them. And then I'd be like, I got all the Metallica. I got it all. And
there's guys who
all the Kiss, all
Empire.
the Metallica. All the good stuff back when I was a kid. So yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's people who started an empire that way.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, so now you've recently introduced a new far red fixture, and I'm used to the old far red we would use to put our plants to sleep. And so, can you kind of speak to how that is different and what's going on with the far red?
Okay, so there's two definite things you can use far red for. One is what you're talking about, which we call end of day treatment. So as the sun kind of climaxes over the earth, when the sun's going down, you notice it gets kind of oranger and oranger and oranger. Well, there's a moment that far red is there, and we don't really see that well, but you see a real red glow just for a second. Well, in the cannabis plant outdoors, it sees that and it says, okay, it's dark. So it starts producing florigin immediately, which is the flowering hormone. So that's what that end of day treatment you're talking about it is so when we shut our light off and we leave that far red on just that little extra time and then shut it off, it tells the plant to go to sleep. You're asleep. If you do it with an LED and you just cut the light off, it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours for that plant to actually go, oh shit, I'm supposed to be asleep, and go to sleep because it missed that signal. That's okay. That's why we have a 12-12 flower cycle. So there's a couple things you can do. You can do the far red end of day treatment, and you can run a 13-11 flower cycle and get more DLI or more photons to the canopy in a 24-hour period to try to get more yield. Or if you do it the other way and you keep it on 12-12 and you introduce that, they start producing that flower hormone sooner, and what that does is it'll make the plants finish sooner because they think it's later in the season than the 12-12 without that would dictate. So they start finishing faster because they're getting more florigin or flowering hormone buildup. So that's end of day treatment. So the other one is when you mix far red and deep red together, they create a synergy that's called the Emerson effect. So basically, you take, let's say, photosynthesis as a numerical thing would be, if you take 660 and say we get 5 photosynthesis out of 660 at a certain level. Or if we take 730, we get 5 photosynthesis out of that same amount of photons. Well, if we introduce both 660 and 730, instead of getting 10, we get 15. So you get this synergistic effect where you get a real big bump in photosynthesis, much greater than the two by themselves can do. You get that synergy. So that's why we introduced that. So we actually had a guy run the Scorpion R Spec FR, and we increased the wattage on that fixture, and the new Scorpion will have this increased wattage too coming out. But so we introduced that new wattage on this. So it's a 680 driver, so it's 720 watts. And so at 720 watts, it has about the same output within 100 micromoles of the Scorpion Diablo at 670 watts. So what he done is he was running Scorpion Diablos. He bought these, and the amazing thing was and he's saying he's seen an increase of 18% in yield, which is massive because we still have the same photon count here. So what my suggestion to my business partner is, and unfortunately it's kind of a catch-22 right now. So Bruce Bugby, and I don't know if you guys saw my picture with him. I actually got to meet him out in Vegas and have a really good long talk with him. And he's kind of the lighting guru right now in LED lights from the University of Utah. But he's got a lot of papers out on this stuff. Well, they're pushing it now, but DLC, so Design Light Consortium, in order to a lot of these rebate companies, they want your light DLC listed, and that's who they're leaning on to make sure that light is actually worth them giving you a rebate, right? That's what they use. It's called Design Light Consortium or DLC. Well, the problem is DLC, they only count the photons in 400 to 700 nanometer. So that 730 out here does not get counted. So when you introduce that fixture to DLC, those reds are pulling power, and they're pulling so that your power's up, but they're not counting the photons. So it pulls your system efficiency way down. So to them, even though it will work better and yield better, they're not rebating that way right now. So it's kind of one of these catch-22s. If you add it into your light, you're going to definitely pay a penalty by not probably getting a rebate or as good of a rebate, but you're getting a superior light, in my opinion. So we've been doing some testing with these far reds for a couple of years now, and Utah State has been doing it for about a year, and it's pretty solid that it's definitely a worthwhile add-on. So what we are going to be introducing is, I don't know if you've seen the UVA bar that you can bolt onto the lights. We're introducing a far red bar that you can bolt on, so that if you want the benefit of that far red, you'll be able to buy that and not have to worry about, is it in my light or not? And it won't kill your rebate if you are in that rebate situation.
Very cool. We actually had someone asking about the UVA bar earlier in the chat. So could you explain what a UVA bar is? Because it sounds like that's something also pretty cutting edge and new in this space.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. So what UVA does is, so there's been some studies that UVB exposure or and like we were talking about, the blue photons bring out quality. Well, yeah. The UV is actually a lot more energy per photon than even that. So what happens is it elicits a response from the plant to protect itself from this, barrage of energy that will ultimately oxidize it and kill it, right? So what the plant's response to that is it produces the resins and the trichrome heads to try to mitigate that damage to its cells. So when you introduce this UVA, it will generally transform some of the CBD more into THC. So you end up getting about it depends. We've seen as high as a 10% increase in THC levels. So not 10 points, but 10%. So if you were at 22% THC, this one with the UVA may be 25% THC. So it's a quality enhancer. Is what it's made for. And the reason we went UVA is, number one, UVB diodes are very, very, very expensive, and they don't last very long. So UVA lasts a lot longer, but with UVB, it's so strong, you usually want to only run it an hour or 2 hours tops. So with UVA, you're able to get that same amount of response by running it the entire time the light is on, the 12-hour cycle. And even though it's not quite as energy efficient to do it that way as the UVB, the problem with UVB is you got to set up a total different timer section. And again, the LEDs are dollars and dollars a piece, so it adds up. I mean, it don't take any time, and you're just way out of sight on cost. And you have to have that separate timing function. So with ours, you actually plug the light into the UVA, and then the UVA has its own cord, and you plug it in, and everything just operates. So it's daisy chained to your light. So you don't have to do anything to turn it on and off outside of bolt it on and plug it up.
So for people who might have issues with too much light, what should they be looking for in their canopy that would kind of indicate to them that maybe they're getting too much light?
Okay, so too much light's kind of a misnomer. So Bugbee has actually released so we have some studies from them. So cannabis can take up to 2,400 micromoles, which is astounding amount of light. So if you actually go outside on a really clear day in noon sun, you're getting about 1,800, 2,000 micromoles. Excuse me. A little late on the West Coast here, or the East Coast here, but so that's quite a bit of light. Well, when you see things indoors happening, when you've increased your light, it's not that there's too much light. You don't have everything else that's needed to support that rate of photosynthesis. So, in other words, you may be shy on your nutrients may not be right, your temperature may not be right, your humidity, or your CO2 levels. So you can't go over 1,000 micromoles with ambient CO2 of about 400 parts per million. There's just not enough CO2 for the plant to function correctly in that environment. So if you want 1,500 if you want to go 1,500 micromoles to the canopy, you got to have a lot of supplemental CO2 to go with it, and higher nutrients, because they're going to be utilizing more. So that's the thing. If people are seeing light stress, it's actually they're not dialed in. But you're muted, sir.
What about bleaching tips? I've seen some of the tips get a little bleached if they're too close to the light.
Yeah. So that there is so is that under the HLGs or another brand, or?
That's under the HLG 600R spec.
Okay. Yeah. So that is photo bleaching. So if you actually took a par meter and read that, you're probably way north of 2,000 micromoles. That's the thing. How far away from the canopy are you with that 650R? About 18 inches or something like that?
In this case, a little bit shorter than that.
Yeah. So that's the thing. You were probably 2,500. I'd say you were probably 2,500 micromoles. So yeah, probably need to raise the light up a little bit and let it spread on out is the big thing, or try to keep the plants shorter. Yeah, that's so if you actually read that, you're probably so photo bleaching shouldn't happen anywhere north south of 2,000 micromoles. So you're probably 2,500. So you're pounding them with light. So that's that threshold that we were talking about that Bugby's saying you can use about 60 DLI. That's probably like 875 DLI. You're getting up there into holy shit,
Excellent. I mean, that's important information, I think, for a lot of people, especially for tent growers who are trying to time their flip so that their stretch isn't getting them into trouble. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and one thing I'm doing here in Tennessee is I'm actually working on medical cannabis. I'm part of something called the Tennessee Growers Coalition. And we are going to have and if anybody wants to donate, I'll be the first one to tell you how government, nobody wants to tell you the truth, how government fucking works. And it's garbage in reality, but it's about money. It just is. That's what it is. For us to be able to make this happen, it's going to cost several $100,000 to get this bill passed. So if anybody wants to jump out and help out in the state of Tennessee to help us out, I'm going to Nashville tomorrow to a dinner of hopefully a Republican sponsor for the bill. He's a pharmacist and he's a really good guy, and he understands the business, and he sees the patients, and he thinks that this is actual medicine and it helps people, because it does. And so he's very passionate about it, and we're lucky to have him. But anything you guys can do, it's called the Tennessee Growers Coalition. There is a donation page. We're going to try to get this passed, and it looks like we may have the votes this year to do it in the state of Tennessee. I want to kind of throw that out there real fast.
Very
I know
cool.
it's kind of a shameless plug, if you will, but I've personally donated a lot of money. And see, I cap out. So the people that are, when you give these campaign donations, you're only allowed so much. And then
Right.
we're capping out. Personally, I do, but it is what it is. So if we can
Right.
get that Help Tennessee Growers Coalition, we're really fighting the good fight over here.
Good. I hope you guys get the legislation that you're hoping for.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, the medical cannabis would help so many people, here in this state, because I mean, it is what it is. I can't look at someone with a straight face and say, I know that you have PTSD, and I know this cannabis would probably help you, but my mom's mom and my grandpappy said you go to hell if you smoke that stuff, and I just ain't going to let you have medicine. I'm not that kind of person. I can't do that. So that's what we're trying for, is to really help people, because this is a healing plant.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead, Q.
I was just gonna say we're coming up towards the end of the hour, and I know it's getting late on the East Coast. So, JR, how about you'll think about what kind of next couple questions you want to ask before we sign off for the night? But I also wanted to shout out some of our listeners in the chat: Wolverine Grown, Mac Buds, Peavy Boy, Dank Vader.
Hey.
We had a lot of supporters hanging out in the chat. So we appreciate everyone that's been hanging out tonight. I know people have been really enjoying. People were saying I could just hang out and listen to Steve talk about LEDs all night. So people were digging
appreciate it, guys. I really do. And it's one of those things I tell people all the time. They say, how do you start a business? How do you get passionate about it, or how do you make it go? It's like, well, if you're thinking about starting a business, if you love what you're getting into. I'm a nerd. I was like, I love this shit. It's awesome, right? I just want to nerd out on it all day. Well, when you have something like that on your side, you love your job, you're going to be successful at it. So when you hear people say chase your dream, do it, because you're going to do a lot better at it than saying, well, I really don't like managing a dumpster company over here, but it pays a better bill than this. Go with your dream, and you will build it into something because you'll be passionate about it. And that's kind of the big thing.
Great. I think if I have to choose of the last few questions, I would probably choose, tell us about laser diodes lighting, and do you see it being the next revolution in indoor lighting?
So yeah, I've heard about the laser diodes, and there are some science behind it, and the efficiencies are getting there. Do I think it's going to be the future of horticultural lighting? I think there's going to be some applications for it, and I've seen some things, but I don't think it'll be the general photon field, or basically what is creating all the photons that you need for white light LED. I think what'll happen is eventually the chemistry on the green light LED will actually get better, and we'll start creating white light with red, green, and blue again, like we used to, and it'll be more efficient, because right now we're doing that phosphor conversion. So you're starting out with the blue, you're losing a lot of energy by tearing off part of that energy to make the smaller photons, or the lighter energy photons like green, orange, red, all that. So at some point we'll start making that back. So it's going to be a while before laser diodes are used for anything, and it'll be a niche thing that they do. But there are some kind of cool stuff out of South Africa that I've seen going on that they're using these things for a kind of a oddball approach.
And then the advantage of them is their efficiency and their
the efficiency and the lifespan. But the big thing, like I said, is they're still really expensive. So we'll see where they go. But the way that they're manufactured, I doubt that they ever become competitive with a mid-power LED. These LEDs are so cheap to produce right now.
Awesome. Well, we're coming up right on the end of the hour here. So we want to shout out to everyone who's been hanging out with us tonight. Obviously, huge thanks to Steven for dropping so much knowledge tonight and sharing the story behind his company and everything that you guys have done over there. It's been really cool. So before you go, where can people find your products, and where can they order their own horticultural lighting group light?
So you can go to hlg.com or horticulturallightinggroup.com to order direct from us. We have a lot of retailers. You can reach out to Wolverine. You can reach out to a lot of the there's a lot of guys that do this on the Instagram and things like that. So we have some guys that way you can do, but also support your local mom and pop's hydro shop as well. You know, I'm kind of Americana myself. We have over 500 retail stores in the US right now. So if your shop doesn't have it, go in and ask for it. They can set up an account and definitely get one. We offer net terms. We're really good to our retailers. You know, if you know, support your mom and pop, because as convenient as buying something on Amazon is, and we have people that sell on Amazon for us and things like that. As convenient as that is, it's unfilling, and you get spider mites or something. Who you gonna call Jeff Bezos and he's gonna tell you how to fix it? No, the little guy or gal at the hydro shop is gonna walk you through it. And it's just that the Americana, the camaraderie, you know. So support your local hydro shops if you can, because I think it's just giving back and to the community. So you know, the big shout out for that for sure.
Thanks, I appreciate that. We always say support your local grower.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, awesome. JR, before we sign off, do you have anything else you want to leave us with before we go?
I just want to thank you for your time. I know you must be a very, very busy man. I got to see your Tennessee facility on your YouTube channel. So if people are kind of interested in seeing what that looks like, maybe go check out their HLG's YouTube channel. And thank you very much for your time and coming on tonight.
Yeah, no problem at all. And we're actually going to be starting a podcast out as well soon enough, and love to have you guys join us some as well. And have you come out. So we built a really nice studio, Brian and Chad, our video guy and video guy and audio guy, has been working on it for a while. We've got a really, really nice studio set up. And so you know, kind of Joe Rogan podcast style. So you guys should come out and visit us here in Knoxville sometime.
That'd be
Love
awesome.
That'd
be awesome.
Love to.
Well, thanks
Sounds
everyone
great,
who's been watching. Yeah, thanks so much, Steven. Thanks so much, everyone who's been watching tonight. Wolverine Grow, High Power Lights. We got a lot of the supporters of you guys in the chat as well. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Steven, for your time. Catch us on YouTube. It's youtube.com/CannaBuzz, I think, or just search CannaBuzz. You'll find this video and other interviews there as well. Thanks, everyone, for your time tonight, and we'll see you again soon. Peace.
See you guys soon.